All right. Looks like we're live. All right, welcome. We are on track for another live stream. This one should be fairly epic. As I'm covering a lot of material of a subject that probably is new to a lot of you, and for those of you who it's not new to, you'll enjoy some of the details I go through. And what am I talking about today? That would be MIDI Polyphonic Expression, or MPE, possibly one of my least favorite acronyms in electronic music. But it is what it is, as the athletes like to say at the end of a game. And what does it mean? So MIDI Polyphonic Expression is sort of a subset of MIDI that's arranged to allow you to control timbres of an electronic instrument on each individual finger or each individual note. So the repercussions of that are that it's a little bit more organic in that your positioning of your fingers on the instrument that you're playing or the interface you're playing is going to affect the output of the sound. And like things like, these guitars obviously have that because you have a lot of control over the expression just using your fingers. So MPE is sort of modeled after these acoustic ideas, but it doesn't really, emulate them. There aren't a lot of instruments that necessarily do the same stuff in the real world that MPE does with the synthetic world in synthesizers. So, with that brief introduction, how do we set up MPE in different DAWs and different software? It's really kind of like a crazy new world. It's not just sending notes on a channel with a regular keyboard. So, if I have a MIDI keyboard thing here and I press a button, I'll get some velocity, so you can control sort of the volume or whatever, so the sound characteristics just by how hard you hit the key. But that's about it, and then you can change the pitch by playing the notes, and then you have a couple controls here. So it's kind of an industrial approach, something you might get from a factory or something from like a control panel for a machine. But while these things are machines, they are instruments, and it's nice to be able to include your body in a way that your body likes to move. So with MPE, we can play an instrument. I'm going to go ahead and test this out here in Equator just to give you an idea, and so you're actually going to see some of the setup. So let me go ahead and take you to the everything view here, so just to confirm that things are working correctly. No, they're not. So there we go. Now you've got the everything view. And actually, I'm just going to go to the screen and overhead and go to Equator. So you see here the MIDI settings dialog, and if you're using this as a plugin, it doesn't really matter, but this is something you would need to do if you're using this on like iOS or the standalone instrument that I'm using here. So this is just its standalone software. You can see that MPE mode is on, and I'm going to choose Sensel Morph, and so I've got some sound. Hopefully you're hearing that. Looks like you are. Okay, cool. So what can we do with this? We can control the filter with our up and down motions. And because it's polyphonic, we can do that individually for each key. And we can do the same thing for pitch bend. So that would be somewhat analogous to being able to bend each string individually, which is not something you do on a guitar. So it's kind of already we've got introduced a sort of synthetic element into our natural attempt at being more natural with our instruments. So beyond just the vertical gestures and the horizontal gestures for pitch bend, we have after pressure too. And that pressure is kind of a little bit more of a subtle effect here. So now your presets or your sound designs are really just kind of like rather than a sound, they are a sound set that depend really on how you play them and where you play them. And this, I'm using the piano overlay because it's familiar, but it's not really the best. Piano is not the best for MPE because you have these different throws on each key, and you can hit the other key by accident, and it can be a little bit upsetting. It's not really designed for that. So something like Don Buchla's Thunder overlay, it's designed for the hands, and it really works well with this. So that's just kind of a rapid example of what MPE can do. And you can see in this Rolly Equator synthesizer, we have several different parameters here. We have the strike. They kind of like renamed everything for, I guess, because it's maybe more illustrative, I don't know. So the strike or the velocity that we're normally accustomed to with MIDI, how hard you hit it, and you can see the value is moving up the harder I hit it. The glide is the pitch, and again you can see that on the bottom here too. So as I pitch bend, you'll see that change. Slide is the up and down. And then pressure, and then lift, which is the lift velocity. So if I lift up slowly or gently, there is a low value for that, and if I lift up quickly, we get a high value of that. And so all of these things can be mapped to sounds for sound design purposes. And it really kind of, again, it opens up your palette a lot, whether it's for something percussive. That's normally something you get by using a knob on a slider, and so you lose a hand, but now you can just do it, and you can even make the software complain. So that is pretty much all I wanted to show about Equator. So that's just kind of an example of what you can do with MPE. And as you can see that they have different names for these things and different ways of mapping all of these values coming from your playing surface. And you're going to see as I go through Cubase, Bitwig, and Logic and all of their instruments, there's kind of a million ways to do this, but and they all kind of have their own sort of logic, shall we say, for each one. So how do we get started with the morph and using MPE? So I'm going to go back to the piano keyboard, and I'll show you sort of how we set that up. So in the Sensel app, we have, if you just take it out of the box and you want to be able to use MPE, you will have to download the Sensel app from our website and install it, and it's for Mac and for Windows. And then you open it up, and the first thing you want to do is add overlay. And so now there's all the different types of overlays. So if you just have the piano or just the Thunder overlay, or whatever, just the music producers music production overlay, you'll want to go ahead and add the MPE version. So you can add the piano MPE or the MP music production MPE, and that sets up these different areas to respect the MPE system. So we come back here to the piano MIDI, and we'll see that each key is now assigned as a type of MPE XYZ pad. So the note, it gives a note value, and then what happens on X, Y, and pressure. And the standard for MIDI Polyphonic Expression is X is pitch bend, Y is CC74, and pressure is channel aftertouch. And then you can compare that to piano MIDI, where that is just a well, in this case, I guess I kind of altered that heavily. So how about we go ahead and add overlay and just see what the standard is. So it's just a MIDI note button, and it gives you a note and then after pressure if you want it. So you get the piano MPE loaded, and then you have to send that map to Morph, and then your Morph is flashed with that. Do that for all the overlays you want, and go ahead and quit the Sensel app. Maybe we should take a look at the visualizer briefly here, because this is actually kind of a nice illustration of what happens underneath the overlay on the Morph. And you can see that it's very sensitive, and it reacts to each touch individually, and it gives you the position for each contact that's on the surface at any time. And so it's just taking that information for each contact, the location and the pressure, and applying that to the MIDI standard. So you got to get out of the visualizer and go ahead and quit the Sensel app and go into the psychedelic realm of the broadcast here. And let's see, I'm going to go to the everything view here. And there we go. So the first one I want to take a look at, now that we have the Morph set up, the first software title I want to take a look at is Cubase. Now, admittedly, Cubase is, I'm not an expert in it, and I've spent a lot of time figuring this out. I went back and forth with some of the developers to get a pretty clear indication of how this stuff works in here and how Cubase thinks about it and how we can apply all of these gestures to get some really cool sound designs. So I'm going to take you through Cubase, setting it up. I'm going to show you how the different gestures are interpreted, and then I'm going to apply that to a couple of their internal instruments, and I'm just going to do it to the initialization patch, so you can see, like, okay, this is the very basic building blocks of MPE and sound design. All right, so you can see I have my microphone coming in here in Cubase, and the first thing you want to do is go to Studio and Studio Setup. I should mention that this stuff is available in our guide. If it's not available now, it will be very soon. But let's go ahead and test what I had to say there. So if we go to guide.sensel.com, we go to Software Setups. We should have Cubase in here. Oh, wow, it looks like that needs to be updated. So that was my fault. So I know I have that documented somewhere, but that just needs to be updated on the website. Now I have a reason to do it. So I'm going to go back to Cubase, and we're just going to get our instruction from there. Let's see, I'm going to go ahead and put this stream over here to make sure I can monitor some questions. And there we go. So I'm going to take a quick look here to see, yes. All right, cool. So it looks like I have some help. And my colleague Matt will be answering some questions while I'm in the middle of yammering. All right, so back to Cubase. The first thing we want to do is go to the studio setup here, and we want to open up that panel, and they are kind enough to have supplied a sort of automatic script. So when the Morph is connected, it should find it, and you'll see it in the MIDI section here. As long as your MIDI ports are active for input for the Sensel Morph here, should be good. There's the Sensel Morph note expression. So this is important. The note expression version of the controller. So you can see the input is Sensel Morph. If I touch this one, that is good. The other Sensel Morph, you can see that there is no feedback there. So we come back here, we can see there's aftertouch, pitch bend, and CC74 are the MIDI messages. The one thing that you probably will want to make an adjustment is to add use for tuning and change the pitch range on that. This is, I'll get into that, but click that box because it won't be clicked by default. Okay, now I'm just going to go ahead and add a track. So there's a couple ways of doing that in Cubase. You can add an instrument track, or you can add VSTs through the browser over here. The MPE, you can even just click on the presets. So it ships with some MPE presets for Retrologue and Padshop. They're two of their internal instruments that are capable of MPE expression. So we can, I could just double click on one of these. I think what I'm going to do is go and add instrument track, take the instrument, and I'm going to add Prologue and stereo out. Okay, great. So we hear sound now that I'm playing some things. Oh wait, I didn't want to do Prologue. Apologies. I wanted Retrologue. All these analogs of analog. Okay, so remove select. Let's try that again. Add instrument track, and I want to add Retrologue, and there we go. Okay, so this is the Retrologue. It's a kind of simple sort of Moog additive synthesizer with 3 oscillators, and we can search for example. We could search for bass, and find some bass presets, or we can search for, in this case, because we're more interested in MPE, we can search for that. And I'm just going to load one of the presets here, and we should get sound, but I need to turn on monitoring. Okay, so I will turn on monitoring and turn off the mute. Okay, so we have sound. That's always comforting. Now we need to go to the inspector for the track here. We can go to the Retrologue, that's just the name of it, and we want to make sure here that it's not all MIDI inputs. If it is, we'll still hear it, but we will not be getting all of the important expression stuff. So we want to set that to Sensel Morph note expression. And again, not the standard Sensel Morph. We want to set it to the note expression input. Now I guess it's maybe worth explaining, in Cubase they sort of decouple the MIDI from what's actually recorded in the piano roll. So they have this idea of note expressions, and there's several different parameters, several different layers that you can attach. And so these are like high resolution controls over particularly their internal instruments. So you can attach on any given note up to, I think, 8 different parameters that can modify how that note sounds. So there's this incredibly granular level of detail that you can do in scoring. Probably not something you'd want to do with a mouse and keyboard, but at least you can get some of those parameters on each note using an MPE device. So I hope that's not a mouthful. So with the chroma, we can already here we're successfully getting that. And it's polyphonic, so each finger is independent, and I have a very drastic pitch bend range here. So and you can actually detune things just by slightly, so you get this very woozy feeling, which may or may not be to your liking. If you are in the boards of Canada, you would be very happy about that. So that is already set up. That's great. But how do we get there? How do we get these different things attached to different parameters in this synthesizer? So I will search for the init device. No. I will try that again. Double click here and init. And init Retrologue 2. So this is just the basic tone, and it's going to give me looks like a sawtooth waveform. Cool. So oh wow, there's already some pressure applied. So how did that happen? So there's a couple places in Cubase to modify how things are how these gestures are applied to an instrument. So I'm going to go ahead and close this inspector for the track itself because we have the correct input. The next thing we want to do is we want to go to Note Expression. This tab, for me, it was not in there by default. I needed to go to Setup and show Note Expression here as an option. And so once I tick that off, then I got this panel. So in here you can see that there are several sort of preset parameters already, and they are set up to work with MPE. So I'm getting the pitch bend on each one, and then I'm also getting that. I am getting the up and down gesture, but as you can see, probably cannot in your tiny video, but there is a filter control here. So if I bring that offset, this is just adding to the control, to the frequency cutoff. So it's as if I'm moving this knob as I move up and down, but it would be cool if it animated, but it doesn't. And again, I can do that independently. All right, that's already interesting. We've gotten a lot more out of this sawtooth wave than perhaps you would ever get out of a regular piano keyboard. And so these are sort of the presets you can apply. I can take that input off of volume, and now my pressure isn't doing anything. And again, and so if I wanted to, I could apply pressure to pan, and if you're listening on headphones or on a stereo, you'd hear that stereo panning. So that's really cool that you can do that stuff. I'm going to go ahead and just make this no assignment, a single click on this tiny little P, no input assignment. There you go. So if I want to assign that pressure to something that's maybe a little bit deeper in this, I can go to my Retrologue interface, and here's where a lot of the action happens. Whether you're in whether you're in Logic or Bitwig or Cubase, or even in VST instruments like Audio Damage Quanta, and I believe Continua has something like this. But there's the matrix, the modulation matrix. You see this in synthesizers all over the place. It's a nice way to be able to see, things that change and like LFOs and inputs, and be able to apply them to different parameters. So that's all done in the matrix of Retrologue, and I wish I could zoom in on that. But there are 4 different banks of this, and you can see that already there's 2 note expression. You'll see this note expressions here are already applied. NE1 and NE2, I'm not worried about those because those are not part of MPE in Cubase. What we want is we can go back to our studio. I hope you're following all this. If not, there's a rewind in the archive. The Sensel Morph note expression, you'll see Aftertouch is applied to VST note expression as note expression number 8. And the CC74, which is the MPE standard for up and down, is being applied to note expression 7. So up and down is 7, pressure is 8. And those would show up in your automation lanes in the piano roll editor and things like that. So what I want to do is I want to use that source. I want to use the note expression pressure, which is 8. And I'm going to put that destination to, might as well just give it the distortion, because distortion is good. And that did not work because there's there is one more thing I need to modify, and of course that is the amount of this. So you really have nice control over your pressure and how much of that pressure is going to work, and that's the depth parameter here. So there's this little slider depth. So we're applying the note expression 8, which is our pressure. and we have a depth. And so you can hear that change from my pressure. And of course you could make it subtract, so I'll turn the distortion up. Depending on what type of model you want to work with. And the other cool thing is that you have a source, and then you have a modifier, and then you also have a destination. And for example, if you wanted to sort of multiply your pressure by an LFO, you could do that. And LFO 1, let's just go ahead and give it some. So it's almost as if we're increasing the LFO on the distortion. But you can also apply it to itself. So it's just, I think what it's doing here is, instead of making a linear curve, you get a sort of squared curve or parabolic curve. So you'll get more detail in the higher ranges. And let me go ahead and so it probably is not all that audible to you, but it does feel different. So it's a nice way of being able to apply those curves in the same way you saw the curves in Equator, which were kind of more fantastic than that. But hey, you take what you can get in the tools that you're using. Similarly, you can, again, take the note expression parameter 7, and now that's my up and down, and instead of applying it here, the vertical expression, I'm going to put no input assignment. And I would like to get some sound. And that's probably because I might cut off here. Yes. And so let's just say we're going to apply that to cut off in here. And give it a certain amount. And we're doing the same thing, but it's just through a different interface. And obviously, you can do things like I can apply this to, instead of cutoff, I can apply it to the envelope for the amplitude release. This is kind of a nice trick in MPE because it gives you a sort of positional. Let me turn that cutoff up. And that release is, it would be nice if it was a little bit longer. Maybe I could offset it a little bit. Maybe not. So we have that very quick release. With this sound, maybe not so exciting, but with something like a marimba type sound, you can kind of get that nice variation just by moving up and down on the keys, rather than having to turn a knob or do some post-production in the piano roll by changing automation. So that is Retrologue. Again, in Cubase, you need to set up the correct note expression input from the Sensel Morph for the track, and then you need to add the note expression panel, I guess, to the inspector, and then you can either use that panel to do some quick assignments of your gestures, if you're horizontal and if you're X, Y, and Z, horizontal, pressure, and vertical. Or you can go inside the synthesizer interface itself, and we can use the matrix within Retrologue. Similarly, I can, let's go ahead and close that out. I can add another instrument, and I'll add Padshop. Padshop is a sampler and granular instrument. So with Padshop, I think it's worth pointing out that you can then sort of, let's see, here we go. So you can manipulate samples at a very fine level just using these gestures. So let's take a listen to that. Hopefully, what I've sort of figured out in this in my brief time with Cubase, maybe not the greatest sounds, but I think they will seed some germs of ideas. Another application is the audio damage Quanta, which is a granular synthesizer as well. Allows you MPE control over scanning through grains, through WAV files. So let's take a look at this one. And again, I'm going to just load the init patch. And I need to turn off the monitoring there and turn monitoring on Padshop. And again, we have that sort of default volume on pressure. You can see it coming in here on that panel on the left. I would like to change the waveform here. So one of the great things, a great way to demonstrate granular stuff is with voices. So here is an audio file that is just a voice. And I'm going to increase the gain. And again, I'll use the matrix, which is down here, very similar architecture to Retrologue, in that you have 4 different pages of modulation and destinations. And I will go ahead and select the note expressions parameter 7, which is our vertical gestures, and apply that to grain position. And in theory, I should be able to modify. And because our resolution is so low, and this is why MIDI 2.0 is kind of exciting, because we will get higher resolution with that for these types of things. I'm going to zoom in my inputs and outputs here. So that is applied to in theory, the new position. And it did not work because this is a live stream and it's a live demo. I don't get to edit. So let's struggle with this for a minute. I'm going to go ahead and load that init patch again. Try loading the sound. Increase the gain because it's very quiet. And you can hear what, just mousing through it. I can change that input. Hopefully this is an interesting part of this sample. And it's not very interesting. And so this is where my failing in Cubase happens. Right, let me go ahead and try that note expression 7 again, and add the depth up to destination, grain, position, and it is kind of a weird sound. Not as exciting as I had hoped, but sometimes live streams go that way. But the point of this is not really to design sounds, it's to get you started with working with MPE and understanding how you can apply those gestures to different sound sources. So with that, that kind of covers the things I wanted to show in Cubase. How to get the inputs, know where to change things on the simple level, and as well as the more complicated granular level, no pun intended, for the synthesizers themselves that are built in. Of course, you can use VSTs that are designed for MPE that are not part of the built-in instruments in Cubase. And just like you would any other kind of any other DAW, you just add however you do it, you add a synthesizer. In this case, we could select Quanta and add, and And now we are using that, and we could use, again, you can see the matrix where you would apply the aftertouch, the bend, let me bring this into view, where you would apply the velocity, aftertouch, bend, and CC74 to all the different parameters in Quanta. I think that's something that I would like to cover in more depth in a different stream. So let me go ahead and delete that so it doesn't bother us as we move on to Logic. Let's see, I need to delete, remove selection as I fumble around in Cubase. Okay, cool. So how about we open up Logic Pro X? And for you Windows users out there and Linux users out there, I'm sorry, this is maybe going to be lost on you, but a lot of people use Logic, and we've gotten a lot of questions about how do you set up MPE. We do have some tutorials elsewhere about setting up MPE in Logic, but I will give it to you here because you are here. And let's see. So the way Logic handles things is it just kind of, because it's almost part of the operating system. So it just ties into, it doesn't have its own MIDI setup. It doesn't have its own audio setup. It just uses the system's setup. So you're kind of automatically getting MIDI in when you select something, and I need to go ahead and select the audio out to be USB XT, and hopefully you hear that. I certainly don't. Let's go take a look at OBS. All right, great. So the interface is working, and we've just got an electric piano. So, you know, and as I go ahead and select different instruments, I can just play them. So let's go ahead and add one of the instruments that actually listens to MPE in Logic. So Logic has a whole host of different instruments. Some instruments you may not realize are actually based on other instruments. So the ones that do work, let me read my list. In Logic, there's Sculpture, which is a physical modeling instrument. So it takes sort of like a mathematical idea of a string on a guitar or a violin or something like that, and calculates that and creates a string sound from that rather than using a sample or trying to use a bunch of waveforms to emulate that. There is, so Sculpture, EXS, which is a sampling instrument. There is the Sculpture, Alchemy is another one. And I believe like ES2 and some of the other instruments. Again, Logic is not my biggest, I'm not super familiar with everything in it, but I've gone through it, and I'm going to take you through several of the built-in instruments and kind of show you how those work. And let's see, I'll go ahead and give you the split screen here. And kind of want to hide that OBS over there. I think it's actually hidden anyway, so it doesn't matter. In Logic, so I want to add a software instrument, and that software instrument will give me an option once I load that up, and by default it loads a classic electric piano. So what I want to do first is I'm going to take you through Sculpture. So I found kind of a cool one. And in this case, instead of going from the ground up on some of these, I'm going to take you just through how to modify presets, because I think it's actually a little bit more, just because of the way it works, it just kind of makes a little bit more sense to try to go through a preset rather. Whereas in Cubase, because there's lots of different names for things, I kind of wanted to start from the ground up. So in Logic, we can find, there was some sort of shredding thing that was really great. Amped Synth Lead. I'm glad everything is a browser. So I'll go ahead and load that. And then I want to go to my channel, which here is, there we go. So now we've got our synth lead. And this is really one of the things that I'm always amazed by with Logic is when you open up some of their instruments, it's like, oh, it's 2002 all over again. So yes, through all these tiny little pieces of type on here, there is actually a sense of how to make things work. So probably the most important thing to find, I wish I could just zoom on this immediately, is this little triangle down here at the bottom. I'm going to click that, and that is going to open up the world of MPE. So we don't need to go to any control panels. This is all done on any global control panels. This is all done on a per instrument basis. And because the Morph is already sending MPE MIDI, it's going to be recognized. So that's kind of nice. One less piece of setup. We want to turn MIDI mono on with common bass channel 1. That's just how the Morph outputs. And mono pitch bend range 48. You can adjust that per instrument however you like. This is a pretty good one because you can kind of get a wild vibrato if you're being very showy, which I'm sure you are. Render mode, basic, whatever. I'm chewing through CPUs here, through my CPU, so I will keep it simple. Now, where can we apply these gestures to the sound that we've loaded up here? There's, again, a lot of really tiny type here, so I will try to make this as big as possible and take this over here. And the MIDI control assign. So down here there are some little menus that you can select. So it says the first one down here, you probably can't read it. I can barely read it, and I'm sitting in front of it. Via depth control. I believe that is something that is sort of would be globally available, and actually can. I'm not sure that's really doing anything. I'm just going to turn it off because I don't really understand it. And if you understand it, please comment. And Control A right now is set to mod wheel. So, if you had a traditional controller, you would be using the mod wheel here to make this control. But fortunately, we can do that on a per note basis with, say, Aftertouch. So I'm going to make Control A Aftertouch, and then Control B 74 bright. So this is again where you need to know that MPE standard, Aftertouch, channel Aftertouch, not poly Aftertouch, and channel Aftertouch is coming from your pressure, and then CC74 is going up. And so now that we've said Control A and B are by those MIDI events, well, we need to find Control A and B, and that's in this tiny little thing down here. Controller A and Controller B, and then here we can, this is sort of like our modulation matrix that we found in Retrologue and Padshop, or in Quanta, but it looks very different and very 2002. So we can, Controller A, the buttons, man, are the little numbers, so you turn them on and they highlight, and then, so Controller A1 is now active, and I can make that target, say, like, you can make it a physical property, so string stiffness, and then you can set a depth to that. And that is, again, Controller A, which we set up as pressure. Not really hearing a lot of difference there. That certainly changed something, but it's probably something that happens on attack. Let's call it Object 1 Timbre. So it looks like sculpture. I'm not super familiar with this, but I guess you can create different physical objects that all work together. So I'm just poking around to see what I can do here. Object 1 Strength, maybe? And that would be this knob. So again, it's not really necessarily a great a continuous parameter that you would want to use. You could, and it's very subtle, I think, so maybe I think we'll take something maybe more radical and just do filter cutoff. That's already set up here. And I'm going to turn that one off. And I'm going to turn off this delay, for God's sake. There we go. Wow, now this kind of like kooky, showy shredding sound has become something very different with my pressure. So that's alluring. And then in controller B, we can then apply that to, we'll turn on number 2, and then now that's a pitch parameter, which we already have on the pitch bend. So it's kind of redundant. Let's find something else that's interesting. Wave shape, is that? It's very subtle, as many of these physical things tend to be. Wow, okay. I wonder what that sounds like on a lower octave. Now this is interesting. There's sort of like this almost metal tapping sound. So this is a great way to explore this stuff. Much more exciting than messing around in these areas. So I believe there's probably other things here, but that's just sort of the basics of like, okay, I have sculpture, I have this different MPE stuff. How do I apply it? If I wanted to apply pitch bend, I wonder if that might even be possible to do through here. No, it only gives us aftertouch. So pitch bend is always going to be pitch bend in this case. So unlike that was if you saw Quanta before, you can actually apply that X to different parameters. It doesn't have to be just pitch bend, which I think is pretty delightful. So that's pretty much all I want to talk about in sculpture. So let's go ahead and close that out. I can use, I'm going to go ahead and turn off all of these effects here. Oh, then we can hear the raw guitar sound that they've emulated. And I'm just going to go ahead and switch to EXS24. And then we can take a look at what this looks like. And again, this is, I'll shrink this down a little bit, shrink this down so you can see the whole thing. This is a sampling instrument, and fortunately it's pretty straightforward for setting up for MPE. Again, I can use this magical little arrow down here in the bottom left and turn MIDI mono mode on with common bass channel 1. All right, so we've already got the pitch bend going. I love it. Okay, so we can see that, again, there's the modulation matrix, and this looks really similar to what we saw in Steinberg, just perhaps a slightly uglier font, I don't know. And we can go ahead and select in this case, the source is on the bottom and the destination's on the top. I'm sure there was a reason for that. These are already set up to listen to velocity and LFO, and going to be modulated by the mod wheel. So we could select a source. Again, I'll select, say, CC70 Control 74. So that's our gesture. And I'm going to select a destination of, sure, filter cutoff. It's always a good one. And that's not really giving us a whole lot because I didn't change the depth. So the depth is this knob here. Instead of it being horizontal, it's vertical. And I need to get some offset here, so that's kind of boring. And what I would like to do is perhaps get a different oscillator involved here. And that oscillator would be, good question. So there are certain things I know and certain things I do not know. And I would like to I'm sure it's staring me in the face, but perhaps the best thing to do is to just go to a preset that is based on EXS24. That is probably the preset. There we go. So we can mess up a piano if we want. I have to say, one of my least favorite sounds is the pitch bend piano. So let's try something else. Well, this may be what we get. There's a lot of pianos. Okay. Okay, so there we go. This could be interesting. Control 74. And we can apply that to... there we go. Control 74. And we'll apply that to filter we could do. How about we do envelope 1 attack? And we change that. We can increase that. Guess envelope 1 is not being used. So that wasn't so interesting. How about we just go with something that we know is going to be used, and that's filter. So already we can get variation in here that is that adds tension to our playing and some drama. Just by using that CC74 and using that to cut off the filter. It's almost as if you're playing with like sort of like instead of plucking, you're just sort of tapping the string perhaps. And of course, you know, do we really care about the analogs? We're really just worried about how it sounds and how we can express ourselves with it. So that's cool. And then again, you would just use source aftertouch. And again, that's probably going to be, in this case, they call it pressure. And I can apply that to maybe filter drive. And let's see what happens. And that was pretty dramatic there. It didn't give me really that continuous sound that I'm after. But here we have release velocity and pressure, which is interesting. Or not pressure, pitch bend. So we could add the so we get that drive as we slide over, which is again kind of not necessarily something you would get in real life, but it can add tension, and as it sort of makes a more emphasis on that slide. So yeah, and so that's just really what you go through. You go through that through the modulation matrix in EXS24. And then Alchemy, I think, is worth going through because it looks really different from all of these. So I'll go ahead and select an Alchemy instrument. I'll put that on our channel. And I'll find some strings or something. Oh boy. Okay, so we have to wait through a little bit of an update here. So in Alchemy, if you're not familiar with this already, we have the browser, then just like a simple view, which is maybe familiar to like GarageBand, and then the advanced view where you can actually dig in and start applying these gestures. So we'll find those gestures. We can add them. Again, we need to create the Control C has gone 74. Control B, pressure is not involved in these. So we've applied Control C to 74. We need to turn, again, MIDI mono on. And the unfortunate part of Alchemy, the way you apply modulation to a parameter, is it's kind of inventive because you just select one and then you get this panel that gives you all the modulation, but it's hard to see where all the modulation is applied, and that's kind of why I like the matrix, because you can really quickly decode how a patch works. In this case, there is some pressure that's working in this preset, but I don't know where. So it's like, oh, that's a really cool idea, and there's not really a good way to get it. So in this case, we can just sort of hunt around on some of these parameters and click on them, and we can see that's going on velocity. How about we click on this, and instead of Control 6, which is going to be one of your knobs here, which would be down here, these macros, I'm going to call that Control 3, or Control C is what I want, which would be in MIDI Control C. And again, you can see how this is, the resonance is now animating. On this knob here in Alchemy. So that's nice that it does at least show that. Cutoff, we can see, oh great, cutoff is using the aftertouch. So in order to do that, it's in note property, aftertouch. And again, MIDI, since we've assigned that to Control C, if you want to get the vertical, you do that to Control C, and note property is where you grab the aftertouch for the pressure. And so yeah, that's how you apply the different parameters for each note in Alchemy. And again, I don't want to go through all the sound design things. There's it's just such a rabbit hole, and there's lots of material to cover. So that's Logic, and I believe, let's see, oh, there's one other example I wanted to show. I showed EXS, showed Alchemy, showed Sculpture. Then what if you don't have the MIDI mono mode? What if you can't apply per note expression? Can you still do interesting things? And why, yes, you can. And as the sun falls and casts across my neck, I shall continue. Let's see, let's take a look at studio horns. This was kind of an interesting example. So, wow, that's kind of a nice sounding trumpet. And you can kind of get that real Casio tone trumpet soon real quick. And such are sampled brass libraries. It's monophonic. Maybe we'll turn that off. And now it gets really Casio tony. I really want to add a dog barking. And the pitch bend's already working. Hey, that's great. As we can see in our magic little area here, we don't have the mono, the MIDI mono, so we don't really have true MPE, but we can still do interesting things by changing the vibrato controller to be pressure, channel pressure. So. And then it kind of gives you a little bit of a, expressive. Let's make that expressive. So it increases the volume too. So we can change the articulation to just a straight up sustain. What else is interesting here? We can change the dynamic controller, and we can make that, again, we can change that to CC74 because we've got that at our fingertips. So we take that brightness controller, and we can probably apply that to something. Dynamics via CC, there we go. So we turn that on. So there, it kind of makes it, especially if you're scoring with this type of stuff, it makes it so much easier to include these things, to be able to just play them with your fingers rather than have to go ahead and, modify the automation and things like that. And it also kind of, just brings you closer to the score that you're making. So, again, that's kind of like fake MPE. It's MIDI monophonic expression in this case, but it is still expressive. So those are the things I wanted to show in Logic. Again, it's, you don't have to do any global setup. You do it on a per instrument basis. It's all done within the instrument itself. You don't need to change anything outside of that. But once you do, you need to kind of go in and adjust your parameters and apply them to things, because a lot of the presets are not going to be built with MPE in mind. So you're going to need to make those quick changes. A lot of times, like it's like the example of the trumpet, like adding vibrato on pressure is very nice, and being able to do vibrato speed on pressure is also kind of a nice effect. And then the filter on the up and down is kind of very common, just to add brightness that way. So I'm going to go ahead and quit Logic and take a look at Bitwig. And Bitwig is kind of the newer kid on the block. As you can see, like as we've these Logic and Cubase have so much legacy involved, and there's so many little controls and things because people have been using them for like 20 years or whatever. Bitwig has only been around for about 5 years, so it's kind of taken a fresh approach to its interface and consider these things from the start. And there's another nice consistency to it that I really appreciate. So I will show you a couple of their built-in instruments and how to apply these expressions and what we need to do to set things up. So let me go ahead and quit Logic, and no, I don't want to save. Take us out of the matrix there and bring in Bitwig. And in this case, because I'm going to need more horizontal, you don't get to see me anymore. It makes me feel less alone if I know that you can see me. All right, so I'm going to go to the screen and overhead, perhaps. My new hotkeys are a little bit more demanding. And hey, while I'm here, I'm going to move this up because it's going to be in my way. And I'm going to make Bitwig a little bit bigger here. And right now we're in arrangement view. I'm going to hit tab, take us into the clip view. As you can see, if you use Ableton Live, we can see that it has a very similar appearance on the get-go, and it has that clip view. So rather than a lot of these other DAWs were taking their cues from the 24-track tape deck and then sort of building a computer interface around that idea, Ableton sort of took the idea and said, like, well, instead of the tape deck, what about the the APC or the sampling pads? I'm sorry, the MPC, and sort of blew that out into a grid of samples or clips that you would use. And Bitwig has also adopted that model. So in Bitwig, to access the preferences, you'll want to make sure, again, because our script is already built in to Bitwig, you can just go to settings and confirm that your controller is loaded. So the Sensel Morph MPE has Sensel Morph on the input and output, and it's active here with the little orange button. So we can be happy that it's working, close that out, and then for our instrument track, where we will add an instrument, I'll go ahead and take a Bitwig, again, because we're working with the native synthesizers. I will go with phase 4 because there's lots of, actually, I'm going to go with Polysynth because it's a little bit more straightforward. And I'm losing steam. All right. So Polysynth is, just sort of a classic model that with Bitwig, things are a little bit more modular. So sometimes the synth might seem a little bit like, wait, where's all the effects and everything? And it's like, well, there's effects bins in here, and you can just build things out as you see fit. You can sort of work with these modules and make your dream synth from that. For example, with that alchemy thing, there was or the sculpture in Logic was, you know, had that big delay and stuff, and it's like, just dial back a little bit. So this is a very straightforward interface. So for the inputs, there's a few different ways you can do this with our script. So first of all, the simplest, of course, is all ins. When you want to get started, you get all ins, which is, you know, the inputs for the instrument. That's controller inputs. And then it's armed for recording. So it's not armed. There we go. If it's not armed, you still want to monitor it, you can turn on the monitoring. So now we have audio. And the other thing I kind of like to point out is our idea of exclusive tracks. So when you go over here onto the right and click the bottom little arrows, that gives you the I/O panel. And there's the Morph MPE controller. And we have these exclusive ports. So what you can do is set up the keyboard to be exclusive to a track. So you'll see that when you select Morph MPE, you can just select the Morph, whatever is coming through the Morph that's not exclusive, that will come in. Or you can say, this is only going to listen to the keyboard overlay. So if I put the Buchla Thunder overlay on it, I get nothing. And I'm going to go ahead and arm this. Now I can put on the keyboard. So that's kind of a nice way, especially in like a performance situation, if you want to be able to switch between drums and overlays very quickly and not have to think about your DAW. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off for the sake of this demonstration. And the polysynth, right out of the bat, is not making any noise because I turned off the exclusive. So we've got kind of an extreme pitch bend. You can adjust that. Let me show that because I failed to do this before. In the Sensel app, you can sort of set some things up for your morph. So in the piano MPE, let's see. I'm going to go here. Yes, you also, because I'm working in Bitwig, I can use the standard MPE, but I'm going to go ahead and use the piano Bitwig MPE because there's a few other nice goodies there. And so I flash that to this morph. The other thing to know is that on the morph itself, you can change the MPE pitch round. So what this does is it sort of, when you hold a note, it's going to bring your, so if you have pitch bending, it's going to stop pitch bending when you're in the center of that key again. And you can sort of change the amount of pitch bend. So we can send the settings to morph. And it's going to come back. There we go. So maybe it's not as dramatic now. And you also want to make you see, you have your XY bend on and your pressure velocity on, and slide out of areas is also on. So that allows you to do that. All right, so those are the settings. We're good here. So in order to get MPE really working, there's a couple things you can do. One, you can just go to a preset and search for the Linstrument, because there's actually a Linstrument MPE voice, and that kind of sets things up already to. Now you're already running with pressure and velocity and expressions. I am going to start us from scratch though, and go with polysynth. Okay, and in polysynth we add the expressions and the expressions modifier. And now we can apply velocity to whatever we want. We can apply timbre to a filter cutoff. So we just sort of click on that and apply it. We can modify it. So this is kind of like a matrix in that we have a particular expression and we can adjust how much it's going to change that. And now it's only going to do a little bit, and we can change the offset by moving the filter itself. And in the pressure, again, we can just quickly apply it to, I don't know, what looks good, we'll apply it to resonance. And just by giving these little pressure variations, I'm getting kind of a nice variation in sound. We could also do pressure to pan, which is kind of a nice idea, because then you can sort of create a stereo field just by varying pressure. So instead of having to build up a bunch of LFOs or whatever to create movement in your sounds, you just press. And so, yeah, that was like the 3-minute demo on how to do MPE in Bitwig. And the cool thing is like, as you can see, I'm kind of a fan of this. It's, you just drop in that expressions and then just apply it to what you want, and you're good to go. And you can, of course, apply those expressions to monophonic instruments. So if I have something like, I don't know, like the Arturia Buchla Easel V, I always want to say 5. Which is not an MPE instrument. No, I don't want any tours. You always have those expressions available to you. They're not polyphonic in this case, they're monophonic. But let's find an interesting thing. Of course, timbre is always interesting. And so just by moving that, we got that at the top here. I can apply that timbre to timbre. And again, we have this expressive play. And when you record it, you can edit it with automation just as you would with anything else. So that kind of wraps up this very extensive tour of using MPE. And all your different DAWs. So, hi, okay, there I am again. So that wraps it up. We went through Cubase, we went through Logic, we went through Bitwig, and we set up MPE on all of them using the Sensel Morph, and successfully started designing some sounds. So hopefully you find this useful either now, today, while you are sheltering in place, or you find it useful in the future. This is a great time to learn things, and obviously I've had to do a lot of learning myself just to get up to speed on some of this stuff and bring it to you. But I am happy to do that. Next week we will be scheduling some more of these live broadcasts, and it would be great if you could check us out on our social media. On Facebook, on Instagram is where we kind of primarily hang out, and then of course YouTube. Of course you can subscribe to the channel and get notified. Also our newsletter will be releasing a schedule of upcoming live streams, and then we'll be also doing some guest artist streams and showing off like what they're up to, how they're getting through this whole mess, hopefully getting a little therapy and support in there, as well as getting a little work and showing off what they do, because frankly, you know, I get tired of myself. So let's see what they got in a couple weeks. Next week we're going to be sort of hammering more at learning and taking you through some different software and different applications that we've already got a lot of great requests in. So thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this stuff was useful, and we'll be publishing this archive, and hopefully we can add a little table of contents. So if you want to get to Cubase, you can get to Cubase. If you want to get to Logic, you can get to that. If you want to get to Bitwig, you can do that and get set up and figure this stuff out. Okay, great. Thank you very much, and have a good day, have a good evening, have a good night.